speaker is Arthur M. Woodford. He earned a BA in History from Wayne State University in 1969 and a Master's in Art and Library Science from the University of Michigan, a field that he has worked in since 1964 and did so until his retirement in 2005. He was the assistant librarian here on the Grosse Pointe from 1974 to 77, and then was librarian for the city of St. Clair Shores from 77 until 2005. As I mentioned, his retirement. And he'll be giving this same program there. If you know anybody that didn't make it tonight, next Wednesday night, a free program at 11 Mile Jefferson at their library. He lives on Harsen's Island on property that was once part of Tashmoo Park. His previous books, and I mentioned that he never ages, and I showed him one of the earlier books, and he says, I have children older than that when we looked at the picture of art in the back. All our yesterdays, A Brief History of Detroit, with his father, Frank Woodford, in 1969. Detroit and its banks, the story of Detroit Bank and Trust, 1974. Detroit, American Urban Renaissance, 1979. Charting the Inland Seas, a history of the U.S. Lake Survey, 1994. The Tonnencourt books, which Art has copies of both with them. They're out of print and very tough to get a hold of. He'll be signing any of the books that he has with him tonight. He was editor for both in 1994 and 1997. Father Abrams' Children, Michigan Episodes in the Civil War. Now your father, it says that your father co-authored that in 1999.
No, he actually wrote it.
He wrote it, and then
that
you...
was a reissue.
Reissuing with your name. Okay.
Yeah, with a new introduction.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
This is Detroit, 1701 to 2001, an illustrated history, of course, in 2001. And then that huge book over there, The Michigan Companion, a guide to the arts, entertainment, festivals, food, geography, geology, government, history, holidays, industry, institutions, long name, media, people, philanthropy, religion, and sports of the great state of Michigan, 2011. Tonight's topic is Tashmoo Park, one of the most popular destinations for the first half of the 20th century, and a trip aboard the steamer of the same name. Located on Harsen's Island, the park opened in 1897, and it was about a 2-hour ride from Detroit. In its heyday, 250,000 people would go a year, including many Grosse Pointers. Sadly, the ship sank in 1936, and the park closed in 1951. We'll let Art tell more of that story. Art Woodford, thank you. Art, are you okay if I turn the lights off completely? Or is that dark enough for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, we'll leave it that way.
Okay.
Excuse me.
That's right. Then I can tell now I can tell if anybody falls asleep. Mike and I have known each other probably, I don't know, for a long time. And I think we may have first met when we were working on the first Tonnencourt.
I think even earlier with Gene Dodonoff when we did the videos on the history of Grosse Pointe. That's actually what we met.
It was a long time ago.
If I may mention one thing that I forgot that I left
Sure.
out.
Yes.
You moved to Harsen's Island before you retired.
Yes.
And you said if you made the ferry, you could be at the St. Clair Shores Library in 55 minutes?
40 minutes.
40 minutes. That wasn't doing the speed limit on M29, was it?
Sure it was.
Moving on. Enough of that.
And I had a very understanding city manager, because a couple of times you have sick days or vacation days. A couple of times over those 4 or 5 years, I had to have an ice day. Anyway, that's another story. I did not know anything about the topic that I'm going to share with you this evening until I moved out to Harsen's Island and realized where I was and what the property around me had been. And I've grown to have a real love of the island and this particular topic, and I hope it comes through a little bit during the presentation this evening. This picture is a modern day painting of the steamer. She left Detroit from the foot of Griswold Street and headed up the river, across Lake St. Clair to Harsen's Island, and then on to Port Huron. It was built specifically for that particular route. And going to talk about the building, her very sad end, and quite a bit about the park itself. And when I'm all done here, I'll be glad to answer questions. You told me, Mike, and I hope I'm going to...
Hit the enter button there. That'll just shift forward to the next Right up there, about halfway down on the right.
Got
There we
it.
go. Yep.
Okay,
You see it?
yes. How can I go backwards if I want to? Just in case. Okay,
Next piece right
got it.
there. There we go.
We're technologically challenged.
Between the two of us.
Anyway, just to give a little idea of the layout of things, this is a chart of Harsen's Island and the north end of Lake St. Clair that was published in 1901. This is the island here. Grosse Pointe is down about here. Port Huron is up there. This is the St. Clair River. Here is the shipping channel. The ships would go back down to the southern lower lakes. This is Harsen's Island here, and the park is right about here. Now, the area was very remote, even up until almost the 20th century, but with the development of shipping on the Great Lakes, the area that is now Harsen's Island and the St. Clair Flats took on took on importance as a way station for freighters and for passenger ships. But the route was so treacherous and so difficult that you couldn't get there, or it wasn't a good idea to try to sail through the channel at night. And so in 1859, these two lighthouses were built at the south end of the island to help ships get through a very treacherous channel. And these are what is known today as the South Channel Range Lights. They are being very lovingly restored by a volunteer group out on Harsen's Island. And as the freighters grew and in size, this new channel was constructed called the Lake Survey Canal. And here it shows a freighter going up the river, leaving Lake St. Clair, entering the ship canal on its way to the St. Clair River. Harsen's Island is up here in the distance. You can see an upbound ship here, and there was a downbound ship on the other side. But passenger service to the area really didn't flourish until the 1870s, 1880s. But the early years, vessels such as the Darius Cole shown here and the Greyhound were very popular passenger steamers on the lakes that would travel from Detroit on up to Port Huron. And these prints show them as they would have been after the Civil War. But regular service to Harsen's Island and the Flats and on up to Port Huron really didn't begin until the 1870s and the 1880s with the advent of the hunting clubs, the resorts, and the hotels. Specifically, the Old Club. This is still in existence, still a very, very popular place at the very end of the island, and this view shows the Old Club in the 1880s. And here is the Hotel Merview. And this is one of my absolutely favorite pictures. This is the Riverside, the Rushmere. What an absolutely gorgeous building. This dates from the 1890s, and sadly, 1905 it burned. And here is the Star Island House and the Rushmere. And here is the Riverside, and this building is still in existence as the Idle Hour Yacht Club. You may recognize it. This is a postcard. And here is Gus Trout's. This is also, hotel is still in existence and is part of the South Channel Yacht Club. And here is the infamous or the famous Joe Bador's, another one of the very, very popular hotels on the island. And of course, here is the Grand Pointe, which was at the very north end of the island. It's hard to believe today the size and the magnitude of some of these absolutely wonderful, wonderful hotels and inns and resorts that were in the area. And this is what really encouraged passenger travel up to Harsen's Island and the St. Clair Flats. The trips up to the island became so popular, and passenger service in general became so popular just before the turn of the century, that the shipping companies turned to also servicing amusement parks and picnic grounds. And so, to keep up with the competition, the newly formed White Star Line Navigation Company purchased 60 acres of land on Harsen's Island. And this is an advertising piece that shows what the park was supposed to have looked like when it opened in 1897. Here is the steamer Greyhound at the dock. This is the area of the park, and this was the casino pavilion, a drawing of it. You'll see some much better pictures of it in a couple of minutes. Here is a map, and it shows along here the hotels and inns and stops along the way that we just saw pictures of. And the Harsen's Island is here. Interesting that they misspelled the name of Harsen's. It's spelled with an E. And here's Tashmoo Park here. Algonac, and then the steamer would continue on up the river to Port Huron, turn around, come back, pick up his passengers at the park, and you'd be back at the foot of Griswold Street by 8:30 in the evening.
Who was Harsen?
Jacob Harsen was a Dutchman by nationality, settled in the island in 1780 something. Bought the island, bought the property from local Indians. The passenger service to the island, and specifically to the park, became so popular that the White Star Line Company realized that they needed to build a new and larger steamer to carry their passengers from Detroit. And so they engaged a fellow by the name of Frank E. Kirby. And this is a picture of Mr. Kirby at the age of 49, at the height of his career, and at the time was the premier naval architect for shipping on the Great Lakes. And here's an advertising piece for the luxurious steamer that was to be named Tashmoo after the park. The White Star Line was the company that had been formed in 1896. And this is a piece of advertising that was published in the paper when the ship was being built. And here is a sketch of the shipyard down in Wyandotte. And here is where Mr. Kirby's boat was built. And here's a picture of the hull just before launch. And the advertising pieces were they were very proud to say that the steamer was launched on the next to the last day of the old century, December the 30th, 1899. And here is the steamer on the ways just before launch. And then she was towed up to the Orleans Street shipyard, which was at the foot of Orleans Street in downtown Detroit, on the river. And here all of her engines and cabin work and woodwork and all the other fittings were added to the ship to make her, as Mr. Kirby was said, one of the finest ships on the Great Lakes. And he liked to say that it was designed after the most lavish hotels of the era. And I think you will agree when you see these interior shots at the time of her launch. This is the main salon. Carpeting, it doesn't show up in this picture very well, but notice the detail in the beams overhead and these furniture and grand pianos and the woodwork, beautiful, beautiful mahogany woodwork. And one of the little items that I like to mention, and you'll see them in lots of the pictures here, are these little brass things down at the bottom of the poles here for the comfort of the gentleman. And I'm sure everyone in the room knows what a spittoon is for. Here's the main dining room. The linen and the fine furniture and cut glass and silverware and the detail on the columns and the chandelier. Really a very, very elegant interior. This was the private dining room for the officers of the line and also for special guests. And I'll have a picture of one of the special guests in just a couple of minutes. And this is one of the 8 private parlors that could be reserved if you wanted to have privacy. Maybe if you didn't want to ride with everyone else, you wanted to have your own private parlor. There were 8, 4 to starboard and 4 to port. But long ride, if you're going all the way up to port here, and a man can work up a real thirst. And this is the tavern or the saloon down on the orlop deck, the lowest deck of the ship. And we go down and have maybe a glass of Stroh's or some other beverage of choice. And again, you'll notice these little brass things down at the
Was the Tashmoo a Canadian ship or American?
You're going to find out in just a minute, Bob. And this is the galley where all of the food was prepared. And I'm not much of a cook, but I find it hard to really understand how the very extensive menu could be prepared in this galley, but it was. And I understand that the food was really very, very good, and we have copies of menus from the dining room, and the choice of items is very, very extensive. Anyway, here's the purser and the chef and his assistants waiting for a very busy day to begin. And also for the women and for the children, there was a refreshment stand where soft drinks could be purchased and possibly maybe a Berger's ginger ale. And again, you notice the brass pots, convenient for the gentleman. And just to the left here on the far side of this particular photograph, you'll see entrance to the engine room. And this is the builder's photo of the engine. This must have been photographed before she got underway, because it's an awfully neat and tidy engine room. The steamer was a paddle wheel steamer and used coal for her fuel, so it was a pretty dirty place. So this is a pretty pristine picture of the entrance to the engine room. And this is an advertising piece at the time that the Tashmoo was launched, and the White Star Line Board of Directors was really very proud of their new steamer, and they said the steamer was longer than the highest building in Detroit. And this is the Majestic building. This is Campus Martius. 14 stories was the tallest building at the time, and you can see that the Tashmoo was considerably longer than the Detroit's tallest skyscraper. And you can also notice along the sides here all of the windows. And very quickly after she was launched, the Tashmoo was given the very affectionate name of the Glass Hack because of all of the windows. And here she is on the Detroit River. This is one of her trial runs. that the builder had to put her through her paces before the company would accept ownership. And I understand that everything went very smoothly. There were 2 trial runs, one on the Detroit River and one on Lake St. Clair. And then this is the spring of 1900, when she was finally ready for service, and the White Star Line Company took the steamer on a trip of the lakes, specifically Lake Erie, to stop at all of the major towns along the way. Here she is at Toledo, getting ready to head up to Detroit. This is a picture of the dock. You notice here the White Star Line banner. This is Griswold Street. The river is down here. This was in June 1900, a very special day in Detroit, and the city was welcoming a very special guest, Admiral George Dewey. And those of you who may remember your history, this is the Admiral Dewey of the Spanish-American War, and he and Mrs. Dewey were on a tour of the big cities along the Great Lakes, and the mayor welcomed Admiral and Mrs. Dewey to Detroit. And here's the Admiral up here with Mrs. Dewey on the bridge of the Tashmoo, welcoming guests for a grand parade, as it was called, on the Detroit River. And here is the Tashmoo. Here is the Admiral's Pennant, the Tashmoo steaming downriver. This has got to be, as far as I'm concerned, the days before MIOSHA and government regulations and Coast Guard particulars. The ship was designed to carry a maximum of 4,000 people, and there's got to be a whole lot of more than 4,000. I don't know where they put everybody that day, but according to the newspapers, a good time was had by all. Finally, all the festivities were over, all of the trial runs were done, all of the special events were taken care of, and here is the Tashmoo finally on her maiden voyage up to Tashmoo Park in Port Huron, June 1900. She's just left her dock down at the city. As a rule, she carried a load of 2,800 passengers was her normal capacity, and it looks like she had a pretty full load then on that first day up to the park. And here she is, summer of 1900, at the park entrance, and we're able to date this particular picture because you'll notice the front of the boat here. This deck ends right here, and you'll see in the next slide why that's important. This was the Park Davis employees' trip to the park, and here the folks are coming from the steamer down into the park, and you'll notice that the steamer has steam up. Look at that absolutely gorgeous plume of coal smoke there. And this is the steamer in dry dock after the first season. And I mentioned the deck. She was in dry dock, and the deck was extended to the jackstaff. This is the front staff at the very bow of the ship. And it was found that at the end of the season, the people really wanted to be, they didn't want to be inside, they wanted to be outside. They wanted to watch what was going on. And so this deck was extended to allow more space on the upper deck. And that was done at the end of the first season. And the owners were so proud of their new Tashmoo that they commissioned this painting of the steamer. Here she is seen as she would have appeared going up across Lake St. Clair on her way to Tashmoo Park in Port Huron. Up at the staff, main staff, is the White Star Line house flag here. Now, the owners of the White Star Line were very, very proud, of course, of their steamer, and she was known as the Flyer of the Detroit River. And they thought that they had such a fast steamer that they would be willing to challenge somebody to a race. And so the president of the company, A.A. Parker, put a $1,000 ad in the paper, or put an ad in the paper for $1,000 to challenge anybody to a race, a 100-mile race on the lakes, and the winner would be called the Flyer of the Lakes. Well, Mr. Parker's bet was taken up by the Cleveland and Buffalo Navigation Company and their steamer, the City of Erie. And this was in June 1901. Here is a picture, starting line. Here is the City of Erie right here. This is the Tashmoo here. These other vessels were loaded with spectators. And this picture was taken off of Cleveland, which was the beginning of the race, and it was 100 miles, actually it turned out to be 94 miles, up to Erie, Pennsylvania. And this was very serious, and it was the race was covered in all of the major newspapers along the Great Lakes. Sadly for the Tashmoo, though she started out well ahead of the City of Erie, when the race was finished, as we see here at the finish line, the City of Erie finished first, the steamer Tashmoo second by 45 seconds. Not bad. The average speed was about 22, 23 miles an hour for the 94-mile race. But even though Mr. Parker lost his bet, the newspapers reported that a good time was had by all. And you know, a moment ago I showed you the private dining room. Well, a number of very prominent special guests were invited to Detroit, and usually they were invited if the weather was appropriate. They were invited to the Tashmoo. And here is President Theodore Roosevelt. And this is in the summer of 1902. He was in Detroit to address the annual convention of the veterans of the Spanish-American War. And so here is the mayor in this very fancy excuse me, carriage escorting the president down to the waterfront for a outing on the Tashmoo. And here he is, you can recognize with his hand on his hip, at the pilot house with dignitaries. They had lunch in the private dining room. They left the foot of Griswold Street, went up to the mouth of the St. Clair River, up at the end of Lake St. Clair, turned around and came back. Evidently had a good time. Here is an advertising brochure. Thank you to Mike Dixon, who is in the crowd this evening. And it shows the route of the steamers. Here is Detroit, of course, Lake St. Clair. Here are the hotels and inns and resorts, the Flats area. Here's Harsen's Island, here's the park, and here's Port Huron. I use this specifically to illustrate the point of the trip, and you get an idea of what the route was like. But also, although the Tashmoo went from Detroit to Port Huron, the White Star Line Shipping Company also had a very prosperous service down to Toledo. And in 1905, the company bought this Sugar Island amusement park, which is right here, and it is right across from Bobolo. Here is Grosse. And it was also a very, very popular amusement park, starting in White Star Line purchased it, as I said, 1905. And at this time, the White Star Line, in addition to the Tashmoo, had 4 other steamers. The Tashmoo was almost exclusively from the Detroit to Port Huron run. A couple of the other steamers did the Toledo run with stops at Sugar Island. And here is the steamer entering the ship canal that we saw earlier. Look at that coal, that coal smoke pouring from the smokestacks. And she's entering the ship canal going up to Harsen's Island and Tashmoo Park and on up to Port Huron. And this is the breakwater of the canal. And here's a fellow waving his hat. We don't know who the fellow is, and the picture has become known as the man and his hat. It is probably the most reproduced image of the Tashmoo in that period of time. Postcards and photographs of all types were reproduced of the man and his hat, and it shows the it's a great picture, really, of the steamer as she's entering the canal. And this is 1906. This is the upper deck of the Tashmoo. Here are 2 ladies enjoying appears to be a very nice day. The steamer is at her dock at the foot of Griswold Street, and they're ready to get underway to the park. This picture dates from 1910. Here is a family. There's also mother and some children over here. Looking carefully at this photograph, I think it must be the end of the run, because this guy looks like he's had enough traveling for one day and he's ready to get to the park. And the other lady is, I don't know whether she's got a mosquito or she's looking at her watch or what, but they look ready to get to the park. And here we are, finally. This is the view of the park entrance, the landing, as it would have been viewed from the deck of the Tashmoo as she approached the island. This covered walkway part was added about 1906, I think, some years after the park had originally opened. But we're almost there. And here we are. This is an earlier view of the landing taken from the Tashmoo, looking into the park. Look at all those people. It must have been quite a warm day. It's dated July. You can see from all of the umbrellas for some shade, but it's a real crowd of people going into the park and coming back to the steamer. And here you can see that building that was shown in the bird's eye view a couple of slides ago. That's the casino pavilion, and the casino pavilion is not the place where you lose your money, but it's a place of enjoyment or pleasure from the Italian word casino, like the casino that's on Belle Isle. There was another pavilion, the dance pavilion, so I use those 2 phrases to differentiate between the 2 buildings. But anyway, there's the casino pavilion, very distinctive architecture, shingled roof, dormers, and cupolas. And one of the favorite pastimes at the park, particularly in the early years, was baseball. There were 2 baseball diamonds at the park, and a semi-pro team played there regularly. And here is a baseball game circa 1910. You notice the umpire is behind the pitcher. The pitcher has just delivered the ball. There's a fellow here on second base. But there's quite a crowd of spectators, and it was one of the real events to watch a baseball game on one of the 2 diamonds at Tashmoo Park. And here is a group of 5 who are obviously enjoying the park. I think the young lady who is peeking around from behind the pole there has a wonderful expression on her face. I like the guy here. It's quite a hairdo he has. But interesting to document the clothing that these folks wore. This was standard fare for a day at an amusement park in 1910. We notice the ladies' watch. They look like they're having a good time. This is the Casino Pavilion postcard. Again, the very distinctive architecture, the shingled, the dormers, the cupolas. And this is where the food service was provided, and also you could enjoy your meal in the protection of out of the elements. And here is a picnic lunch. Date sometime just prior to the First World War of folks who had come from Detroit, had a wonderful ride on the steamer. They stopped at the park for the day, and here they are having a box lunch. But again, the dress is, I think we would all say, was rather formal. Ties and hats and so forth. And shortly after the park was opened, the park again opened in 1897. The first major addition to the park was the dance pavilion. And here it is. This is a postcard view of the dance pavilion. Again, the distinctive architecture, the shingled roof like the casino pavilion, 10,000 square foot hardwood floor for dance. And it was one of the major attractions at the park for many, many years. And here's the band, William Finsel's band. We have a contract, copy of a contract for the band, and there were 8 members of the band, and this dates from 1914. There are only 7 bandsmen here. I figured the 8th one is taking the picture. They're taking a break here on the island. They rode the steamer up to the island. They spent the day entertaining, performing for the crowds at the dance pavilion, got back on the steamer at the end of the day and rode back to Detroit. So they had a long day, but here they are taking a break on the island from their busy schedule. 1916, another addition to the park was the merry-go-round, and this was your classic steam calliope, steam-driven animals in the merry-go-round. As I said, opened in 1916 and was possibly the most enjoyed ride at the park right up until the end into the late 1940s. But a day at the park could be tiring, particularly for mothers or grandparents with small children. So the owners, the White Star Line Company, opened a nursery for mothers and small children, opened in 1910. Here is the staff out in front of the nursery. They had rooms where, as I say, mothers and small children could rest from the heat of the day and from the exhaustion of all of the activities. Remember this picture, because we're going to see more of it in a couple of minutes. In addition to the dance pavilion and the merry-go-round and the baseball diamonds and picnic grounds, there was the bathhouse. And the bathhouse was built just upriver from the adjacent to the loading dock where the steamer discharged its passengers. And again, you'll note the architecture, the shingled roof, the cupolas, the viewing area up here, the lockers down here, the swimming area here in the river. You notice that the towels are drying on the line in front of the lockers. And for 35 cents, if you didn't think to bring your own bathing suit, you could rent a suit and a towel, and you got the use of one of the lockers at the bathhouse, all for 35 cents. And then for an extra 5 cents, you could get another towel, that was, I guess if you're going to get really wet, a cap, and stockings. And I could not figure out what stockings meant. Well, here's your answer. Here is a bathing beauty, circa 1920, in one of the Tashmoo Park swimsuits with a cap, with stockings, and laced boots. My, how times have changed. And I'm told by folks who remember the park and the swimming area that these were a dark navy blue wool swimsuit, and they had Tashmoo Park stenciled across the front.
Who were the architects for those buildings? Do you know?
No, I don't. Sorry, can't answer you that question. This is the entrance to the park. The walkway, this would have been from the entranceway. This is the casino pavilion here. The dance pavilion, you can't see it very well, but it's over in here. I like this particular postcard because of the sign that's at the entranceway here, and this dates from a pre-World War I, and it says private property. The driving of cattle and horses across the property is prohibited. White Star Line. So I guess the farmers couldn't drive their cows across the amusement park, which is probably a pretty good thing. One of the highlights of a visit to Tashmoo Park, of course, were the souvenir stands, and particularly the souvenir stands from the First Nations people from Walpole Island. And Walpole Island is just across the river, the St. Clair River, opposite Tashmoo Park, and it is still there today, and still a First Nations reservation. And here's a very proud young man at his booth on Tashmoo Park, and here are some of his artifacts. These artifacts have become real collectibles, and if you go on eBay, you might be fortunate enough to be able to purchase one, but they're a bit pricey today. But this, the purchase of one of these artifacts was, again, one of the real highlights of a trip to the park. Yes, sir.
He's got a mug from the park.
Oh, we'll, if you'll pass that around, and we won't let anybody out until we make sure that the mug is back in its proper hands.
The bank.
Okay. And I'm fortunate enough to have some glassware and some other artifacts, and I have a little pin that I wear when I do the show program that says Tashmoo Park on it. This was all stuff that you could buy at the park. But
where does the name Tashmoo come from?
You're going to find out in just a minute.
Okay.
I paid extra to have Issy right in the crowd, so she would ask that question. Now, the Tashmoo was a very safe steamer. There was never a serious accident, never a loss of life, but as the newspaper said, there were an occasional incident. And I like the word incident. And here is 1927, in the winter, December, a fierce storm in Detroit, and the steamer broke free of her moorings, was blown upstream, and wound up the Belle Isle Bridge. And there she is. You see some damage to the railings here. This was a Detroit News photograph. You know, it's...
Is that MacArthur Bridge? That's the previous bridge.
No, this is the MacArthur Bridge. Yeah. Yes.
Very good.
Yes, and here's another picture. You get a little better view. Here are a couple of tugs pulling the Tashmoo off. Fortunately, there was nobody aboard. No one was hurt. There wasn't a whole lot of damage, and she was ready for the next season, all repaired.
That was the north side of the,
That was the Detroit, the downriver side of the bridge.
so it must have been blown up.
That's correct.
That's quite a way.
Yes, it was. According to the newspaper, 60 mile an hour plus. This is one of my absolutely favorite photographs, and it shows the steamer, and you can see the length, and she's kind of rounded in the middle here. This is the housing for the paddle wheels, and the engine room was in here. This picture was taken from an airplane. It's 1934. What had happened is that she was turning around in the river in front of the park and hit a sandbar and damaged one of her paddle wheels. And so she had to be towed back. And one of the other steamers was sent in on an emergency run up to the island to pick up passengers, and they got safely back to the city. Again, no one was hurt. This is one of these incidences. And she was only out of commission for about a week. The paddle wheel was repaired at the Orleans Street Yard down in Detroit. And here is a picture of the hull. You get an idea of the shape and the grace of this beautiful steamer. And this is the paddle wheel right here that's being repaired. This picture dates from 1934. It's the height of the Depression, and unfortunately by this time hard times had come to the White Star Line navigation company. They had to sell their amusement park down on Sugar Island. The 4 of the steamers, the company steamers, had to be sold, and all that remained were the Tashmoo and Tashmoo Park. But a trip to Tashmoo Park in the Depression was still really a very special event. And you can see from the banner on the side here that this was a Detroit News excursion for employees, and that's why, understandably, we have some wonderful photographs of the steamer as she's loading. This is the dock at the foot of Griswold Street. You can see the automobiles and the dress of the folks here. It gives you an idea of the date of the photograph. And here she is pulling away from the dock at the foot of Griswold Street. Here you can see the Ambassador Bridge in the background, one of the DNC overnight steamers here. And you can see the water being churned up on both sides by the great paddle wheels as she gets underway. Again, wonderful black smoke pouring from her funnel. And here are a group of ladies enjoying the day on the trip up to Tashmoo Park. And as I like to say, there isn't an electronic device to be seen. They are enjoying their knitting and crocheting, and it looks like they're having a wonderful time as the steamer heads up the river to Tashmoo Park. This is a painting. The fellow who did the painting at the very beginning, the first slide that I showed, Peter Rentensbacher, this is his modern day painting of the steamer. And one of the very special things about the Tashmoo, the steamer, was the moonlight cruises. And here's the moonlight cruise as Peter has depicted. And you'll notice the lights in all of the windows. So the name, the glass hat, you can see why that was such a popular and very affectionate name. But moonlight cruises were taken up to Tashmoo Park and also down to Sugar Island Park. The park was still in existence. There was still a dance pavilion there, although the park at Sugar Island was no longer owned by the White Star Line. But the steamer would leave 8 o'clock-ish or so from Detroit, would go down to one of the, either down to Sugar Island or up to Tashmoo Park. There would be an orchestra aboard, and they would dance, get back onto the steamer and head home, and a wonderful day would be, a wonderful evening would be had. This picture depicts the steamer down at Sugar Island in June of 1936. She had been chartered by a group called the Pals Club of Hamtramck. There were 1,400 guests aboard her that evening, and they had gone down to Sugar Island, as I said. This painting depicts her as she is leaving about 11:30. And as she turned in the lower Detroit River, she hit an uncharted obstruction, a rock, a boulder of some kind, and a large hole was ripped in her hull, and the engine room staff called up to the pilot house and said, "We've got a lot of water coming in. You better get us to shore immediately." And so the captain very quickly guided the steamer across the river to a dock at Amherstburg, and safely tied up, and the orchestra played on, and all 1,400 guests were escorted off the steamer. They had buses waiting for them to take them back to Detroit. All of the crew was evacuated safely. There was not one loss of life, and as far as we know, there were absolutely no injuries, thank goodness. But the next morning, this is what we saw. Tied up at the dock in Amherstburg, 18 feet of water, sunk on the bottom. And here is a bows-on view. You can see just how serious the situation was. But the local newspaper said, well, they'll have her fixed in no time. They'll put a patch on the bottom and pump out the water, and she'll be good to go. Well, the captain and the first officer and the chief engineer shown in this newspaper print, and that's why it's a little grainy, they knew better. And when a hard hat diver went down to check the hull, the damage was far more serious than first thought. As one newspaper reported, the hull had been ripped open like an old sardine can, and that the damage was so great that the steamer Tashmoo would never sail again. And here, sadly, is the hull after salvage being towed downriver to the Nicholson Yard, where the hull was eventually sold for scrap. And here's an ad from the newspaper, from the Detroit Free Press, I think, 1936. The White Star Line, Tashmoo Transit Company, Detroit to Port Huron, board the beautiful SS Tashmoo. Here is the schedule for the day, and right here, service discontinued for season of 1936. Well, not only was the season discontinued, but as I said, the steamer would never sail again, sadly. So we still had the park, and people wanted to get up to Tashmoo Park, so the company chartered other steamers to carry their passengers, and one of the most recognized of the group was the Pointe Bay. And here's an ad from the late 1940s for a trip aboard the steamer Pointe Bay up to Tashmoo Park and up to Port Huron. And here's an aerial view of the Pointe Bay, not quite as grand and as elegant as the steamer Tashmoo, but the Pointe Bay had also been designed under the direction of Frankie Kirby. And here is a photograph postcard of the entrance to the park, dated the late 1940s. Here is the walkway into the park. Here is the casino pavilion. Here's the dance pavilion over here. One of the new rides that had been added was the Ferris wheel that you can see behind the trees here. But the owners of the park were still adamant. No automobiles were allowed on the property of the park, and that's what that little sign says here, no cars. Well, this is a picture of the Ferris wheel, and here is Bill Harm, who is the superintendent of the park, and I'm very pleased to say that most of the pictures, almost all of the pictures of the park that I have here that are in the book were shared by a young lady in the name of Michelle Comer. Bill Harm is her grandfather, and Michelle is kind of the family historian and has a wonderful, wonderful collection of pictures of Tashmoo Park. But finally, the park administration realized that automobiles were here to stay, and so the park was opened to automobiles. Here is the casino pavilion. Again, you notice the dormer, the cupola. This is the front of the dance pavilion over here, and one of those nasty automobiles. And here's another picture postcard from the late 40s. There are a lot of cars now. And it says Tashmoo Park, Harsen's Island, Sans Souci, Michigan. Sans Souci is the little, kind of the downtown for those of you who might know something of Harsen's Island, and that's Sans Souci is where the post office used to be. But here you see folks that, you know, it's no longer a dirt road up to the dance pavilion, but a strip of concrete. And what happened to the Tashmoo? Well, when she was salvaged, a lot of her parts were sold off, and her pilot house was purchased by a Canadian freighter captain, and he used it as his summer cottage. And here is the picture of the pilot house up near Chatham, right, Mike?
Woodford.
And beautifully preserved. Sadly, in 1951, the cottage caught fire and burned to the ground. But times were changing. Here is downtown Detroit, 1950. Here is Griswold Street, right here. Here's the old Verner's plant. Many of us stopped there for Verner's when we were going either to Tashmoo Park or down to Bobolo. This area right here was being cleared for the construction of the first building for the new Civic Center. That is where the Veterans Memorial Building was going to be built. The buildings here had been demolished, and shortly after this photograph was taken, this building was demolished. And this is the offices of the White Star Line Navigation Company. And you can see right across the front here, it says Tashmoo Park. So this is Griswold Street. This is where the dock where the steamer would have docked and loaded passengers for the trip up to the park and Port Huron. This is one of the D&C boats and the D&C shed here, and those were torn down shortly afterwards as well. And finally, the end came. 1951, after a series of closings, the company gave up and put the property up for sale. And here is Tashmoo Park with its for sale sign. And sadly, for a number of years, the property was vacant, empty, and then it was purchased in the late 1950s for a marina. And here is an interesting picture, 1955. This is the landing, the covered landing, and there had been a very bad storm, and the covered area here had blown into the river. And shortly after this photograph was taken, this obstruction was removed. But the picture dates from 1955. And here is, not only was it the end of the park, but it was the end of passenger steamer service to amusement parks up the St. Clair River into Port Huron. This is 1953, and this is the steamer Putin Bay. Set afire off of Windmill Point, and it was done on purpose. The salvage people determined that the best way to get rid of all of the wood upper structure was to set her afire. And here, you can't see it very well, but there are a whole number of private yachts and boats here that went out to watch the spectacle. And if you read the article from the news from May of 1953, they interviewed the last captain of the Put-in Bay, and he stood there with tears running down his face as he watched this beautiful, beautiful ship burned out on Lake St. Clair. And here she is the next day being towed to the scrapyard, and it really did finally bring an end to, as I say, passenger service and amusement park service up the St. Clair River and up to Port Huron. And then in 1997, the new owners of the marina, which was on the property of what was Tashmoo Park, had a grand celebration. And here is Susan Bryson, the wife of the owner, and here is one of the island's local fellas, Dick Earl, ready to unveil a historical plaque. This was July the 4th, 1997, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the park. And here's the tent, and food service was provided, and there were 250-some, 300 people that came to the park that day. Anybody here, by any chance, might have gone to that? Okay. It was quite a day, evidently, 1997. And one of the highlights of the day was, this is the Diamond Queen, part of the Diamond Queen excursion boat company. They came up from Detroit. There were 150 passengers, and for one day at least, folks had a little bit of a glimmer of what it might have been like to take an excursion steamer 100 years earlier up the Detroit River to the amusement park. And you can see the date stamp on the photograph here, July 4th, 1997. Sadly, here's the park today. This is the casino pavilion. It has been covered over, but you can still see very distinct the shingled roof, the cupolas, the dormer here, the cupolas. Over here is the dance pavilion, and it's been covered, used for storage purposes. This little building was moved some years ago up here after this had become a marina. It's believed by the owners that it was the athletic equipment building where you would have rented bats and balls and bicycles and other things for use in the park. This is the interior of the dance pavilion. Look at those original 1907 iron girders. But the hardwood dance floor is gone, it's concrete, and the building, as I said, is used for the storage of pleasure craft. This building is the owner's home. This was moved to the front of the property from in the park up to the main road in 1947. And those of you who may have remembered and have a good eye will recognize that building. There it is. Yeah, that's the old nursery. And this part of the house has been added onto. Mr. and Mrs. Waters live there now, and the building is beautifully, beautifully restored, maintained. And I had a walk through, and you can see the old steam piping is still in the building.
How far down are you from there? Your place?
About 100 feet.
Wow. Very good. That's what I thought.
Here's the dock. It's now, as I said, a marina, but this is the dock that the Tashmoo would have tied up to. Again, here is the casino pavilion at the end of the dock. You can't see it very well, but over here in the trees is the old dance pavilion. This is the casino pavilion. Again, very distinctive architecture. And here is the back end of the park. It's kind of sad. It's overgrown. There are no baseball diamonds. There are no picnic grounds. There is the refuse of a working marina. And here, the final slide is an overview of the park taken by my friend Peter Durant, who lives,
The library will be closed in 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
we got 15 minutes, we'll be out of here on time.
Couple of questions and then sign some books.
And there we'll go. This is the view of the of marina today. The park ran from this street here, back up about here, and down this way. That would have been the boundaries of the park. Here is the pavilion here. Here's the dance pavilion here. This is a modern shed, storage building, and my house is right there.
Right there.
Right there. So we are, that's how I came to learn about Tashmoo Park, because I wound up living there. And a wonderful place it is. Yeah, there's our dock down there. But this is the dock. The owners said that about 70 feet of the dock have been removed, so the original dock for the Tashmoo would have been out there. But there you have, ladies and gentlemen, Tashmoo Park.